Number 8. Knight Capital Group disruption. In 2012, activities from Knight Capital Group caused a major disruption on the New York Stock Exchange. A code error in the firm's automated systems meant it began trading erratically. When the stock market opened on August 1st, Knight Capital started buying and selling millions of shares distributed among hundreds of stocks. It took roughly 45 minutes before the error was contained, and over that time, the company bled out roughly $10 million per minute. By the next day, 75% of Knight Capital Group's equity value had been erased. Number 7. Mars Climate Orbiter. This robotic space probe was launched by NASA in 1998 with the purpose of observing Martian atmosphere, climate, and surface changes. 286 days into the mission, communication with the orbiter was lost right as it entered the Martian orbit. The main problem was that a piece of ground software supplied by Lockheed Martin showed measurements in imperial units, while the NASA trajectory calculation software used the metric system. Therefore, there was a discrepancy when it came to the orbiter's thruster impulse. It was calculated in pounds/4 seconds and interpreted in Newton seconds. Calculations made after the error showed that the orbiter was on a trajectory that would have taken it within 35 miles of the surface. At that point, it either burned up in the atmosphere or skidded off it and plunged towards an uncertain fate into the depths of space. Number 6. Ariane 5 rocket. In early June 1996, the Ariane 5 space rocket was lined up and ready for its maiden flight out of KOUROU, French Guiana. The rocket was the joint effort of 20 European nations and reportedly cost about $8 billion to develop. At the time, it was carrying 4 satellites into orbit. 37 seconds after the rocket took off, hurtling towards the sky, it started to veer off its path. The problem was that the rocket's internal computers and software had been reused from its predecessor, the Ariane 4. They were tasked with monitoring onboard speed and orientation, but couldn't cope with the newer model's power. The rocket's lateral velocity exceeded the limits of the guidance system's computer. The error basically meant trying to stuff a 64-bit number into a 16-bit space. It caused the rocket to take a sudden downward turn and self-destruct in an aerial explosion. Number 5. Prison system error. A computer error in California's prison system caused 450 inmates with a high risk of violence to be released without having to report to a parole officer. It was a consequence of the state's January 2010 initiative to reduce prison overcrowding. Prisoners at a very low risk of reoffending were released in non-revocable parole conditions. This meant that they didn't have to check in with the parole officer and could only be arrested if they committed a crime. Unfortunately, the computer program used to make the assessment didn't access an inmate's disciplinary history. This included gang members, people who committed violent felonies or sex crimes, as well as those who'd exhibited violent behavior behind bars. Moreover, the program relied on a database from the Department of Justice that recorded arrests but missed conviction information for nearly half the state's arrest. What's perhaps even more worrisome is that no further measures were taken about the hundreds of inmates who'd been released because of the error. Number 4. Chinook helicopter crash. The 1994 Chinook helicopter crash is among the worst peacetime disasters ever faced by the Royal Air Force. In June of that year, the aircraft was flying above Scotland in foggy conditions. Among the 29 souls on board were almost all of the UK's senior Northern Ireland intelligence experts. The helicopter crashed on the tip of the KINTYRE Peninsula, killing everyone on board. For years, the incident was blamed on pilot negligence. However, further inquiries discovered another possible cause connected to the helicopter's FADEC, or Full Authority Digital Engine Control. At that time, FADEC was being implemented on all Royal Air Force Chinooks. It had been responsible for a previous Chinook crash in 1989, and tests performed on the software had found it unverifiable and therefore unsuitable for its purpose. Number 3. Patriot missile failure in Dhahran. The Patriot missile system employed by the US and several of its allies can detect and shoot down incoming aircraft or ballistic missiles. In February 1991, a software error meant the anti-ballistic system failed to detect an incoming Iraqi Scud. As a result, 28 American soldiers were killed at a makeshift barracks in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. At the time, the Patriot system had been operational for about 100 hours. A software error caused this internal system to drift by 1/3 of a second. Thus, compromising its handling of timestamps. When coupled with the speed of the incoming Scud, the error translated to a missed distance of nearly 2,000 feet. The radar had initially detected the Scud but couldn't track in real time where to look next. Therefore, the Patriot missile system made no interception attempt. Number 2. Therac-25. Software errors caused the Therac-25 radiation therapy machine to give patients massive overdoses of radiation. Between 1985 and 1987, Therac-25 was involved in at least 6 accidents, 3 of which resulted in death. One problem was that the machine depended entirely on software safety checks and had removed any traditional hardware failsafes. The engineers who designed it were also overconfident in their work and didn't resolve any reported software bugs. As a result, patients were struck with over 100 times the intended dose of radiation in focused areas of their bodies. In some cases, the high current electron beam caused them to scream in pain and run out of the treatment room. After a few days, patients had radiation burns and began showing signs of radiation sickness. Number 1. Boeing 737 MAX. Repeated computer failures that claimed hundreds of lives have led to a worldwide grounding of the Boeing 737 MAX. Originally developed in the 1960s, the Boeing 737 is a twin-engine, narrow-bodied passenger airline. The aircraft has undergone constant upgrades and updates so that it could adapt to the modern world of aviation. The 737 MAX was based on previous designs but featured aerodynamics and airframe modifications as well as new engines that were more fuel efficient. The engines were placed higher and further forward than on previous models. Because of the difference in engine placement, the aircraft had a tendency to pitch up during flights. Boeing thus implemented a new flight control system called the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, or MCAS. The main purpose of the software was to lower the aircraft's nose, without the pilot's intervention, whenever it was too high. Unfortunately, the MCAS was susceptible to erroneous activation, and 737 MAX pilots were often uninformed of its implementation. This led to 2 tragic crashes only several months apart. The first was Lion Air Flight 610 in October 2018, and the second was Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 in March of the following year. There were no survivors, and together the crashes claimed 346 lives. Thanks for watching. When it comes to life and death scenarios, would you rather critical decisions were made by humans or machines? Let us know in the comments section below.